Hey, fight fans, welcome back to Carl Prusa MMA. Today, we got a very special guest. Usually, I got fighters on here, but today I'm going to switch things up a little bit. We have ourselves a ring announcer. You might have seen this individual for some of the biggest boxing matches. You might have also seen him from the little game bred bare knuckle MMA. He is Mr. Lupe Contreras. Lupe, how are you doing, my friend?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for the invite. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, man. So it's been so awesome to watch your career. I mean, you've fought, not fight, but you've covered some great fights. Obviously, doing ring announcing for huge boxing, huge game bred, huge MMA stuff. How did you find your niche? How did you get into this crazy world of ring announcing?
It was actually a fluke. I have a background in radio. I worked in what I guess most people would know as Tejano radio. Like probably the most famous artist is Selena. We've all seen the Selena movie. I did that for about 8 years or so. And at the same time, I was training at a Muay Thai gym. Actually, a pretty successful gym. Saw some guys come through like Eve Edwards, Pete Spratt, Rico Rodriguez, and Tito Ortiz did a little bit of training there as well. And my trainer at the time, a guy by the name of Sal Solis, he said, I'm doing a small show. Back when it wasn't even called MMA, it was called NHV, No Holds Barred at the time. And he says, you want to be the ring announcer? He knew I had some experience. And so I did that. Fortunately, at one of those events, someone took a picture of me and gave it to me. And then a few months later, I was looking at TV, Spanish television, and they were running a contest called La Voz del Box, or the Voice of Boxing. And they said, if you want to be the next voice of boxing, tune in, send your information. I took that picture they had taken of me at the No Holds Barred event. I sent it in, and I won the contest. It would just kind of snowball from there. Pretty much, it was the equivalent of getting drafted right from high school into the NBA. You know, it was that would have been my third show. It was national TV, and from there on, it just kind of snowballed. Went from there doing ESPN, doing Fox, and then the moment came along where Michael Buffer couldn't do one of the HBOs, and Top Rank said, "Hey, you're going from the sidelines to the big show." So I got the chance to do that, and fortunately, I've been in the business ever since.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it, how, especially mixed martial arts, how that has grown up over the years. I mean, 20, 25 years ago, people are calling it human cockfighting. I mean, it wasn't legal everywhere. It was like labeled criminal, barbaric activity. Now, obviously, you have all these different MMA promotions. You have bare knuckle MMA promotions now. When you first got into this, did you have a vision for combat sports? Could you see it becoming as mainstream as what it is today?
It was tough to see it becoming mainstream. I always thought it was going to be, somewhat like boxing. It can be a bit of the hardcore boxing is more of a niche sport. Obviously, you get your mega pay-per-views, which, become, social phenomenons every now and then. But those are few and far between. It was difficult to see it becoming mainstream just because of the fact that even the first few shows I started doing in Texas, you could kick, you could elbow, but you couldn't strike with a closed fist. They were open palm strikes at the time. So there was a lot of, different rules from state to state. There was no real continuity. So to see the way it has exploded and it's just become, so mainstream nowadays, going back 20, 25 years, it was pretty difficult to see that come to fruition.
I think another thing that we're really seeing now in all of combat sports, mixed martial arts, boxing, is the rise of personality. We're in a personality entertainment driven era where you're seeing guys, they're putting on characters, they're doing extra talking, they're putting stuff out on social media because they know that's what it takes to get a title fight. That's what it takes to get these fans to open up their wallet and to buy. How do you think personality entertainment has impacted the world of combat sports?
It's a big part of it. The one thing I've always said is, in order to be truly successful in combat sports, you have to be special. You can't just be a good fighter. You can't be a good fighter with the personality of a wet blanket. You can't be a guy that doesn't have, for lack of a better term, that stick or that gimmick that's going to attract people's attention. What people want is they want spectacle. They want something to have them either connect with you or something about you that's going to repel them. You either got to be the hero or the villain. They're either going to want to buy the pay-per-view to see you win, or they're going to buy the pay-per-view to see you get laid out flat in the cage. So it's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of guys try and do it, that it's not their forte. So oftentimes, and we've seen it many times on some of the call-outs, in UFC, post-fight interviews, where these guys are just trying really hard and it just falls flat, or it just sounds corny. And so my thing would be is if it doesn't come naturally to you, I would probably just avoid it and stick to your strong points.
One thing I think that really sets you apart from what you do is your ability to switch up languages. I mean, you're able to transition from speaking in Spanish right to English. Do you think that has helped maybe diversify you a little bit and allow you to lead your success in the world of ring announcing?
Oh, it's been key. As I said, with the with the contest that I won, it was on Univision or Univision, where they were looking for a perfect person who was bilingual, and they wanted you to be as close to perfectly bilingual as possible. It's one of those things that people always ask. How do you balance those two things? It was something that you never really think about as a Latin kid. You're speaking in Spanish to grandma, and then in the very same breath, you switch over to English to talk to your brother, and you go back and forth. So it's one of those skills that you've kind of developed, along the years that you really didn't realize was a talent or a skill. And once that did come to play a role in what I did, it definitely helped me quite a bit. It's something that allows me to do work both in Latin America as well as in the U.S. And yeah, without it, I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have ever gotten my initial opportunity otherwise.
When you're going in there, when you're in the ring, when you're in the cage, when you're doing your announcing, is listening to how the crowd reacts, is that key?
No, it's the exact opposite. It's you are conducting the crowd. You don't let them conduct you. I always compare it to you're sort of leading the orchestra. You're the maestro, and they're the orchestra. If you deliver an intro with a certain tone, with a certain level of excitement, the excitement's contagious. It's one of those things where you lead them. I always compare the intros to a movie trailer. Rarely do you see a bad movie trailer. When you go to the movies, most of them are pretty entertaining. They at least pique your interest a little bit. The movie may not always deliver, but the movie trailer is usually pretty good. So I feel my role is to get the crowd excited. It's almost like a roller coaster. My portion of the fight is the little, the click, 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 click when you're getting up to that little top of the hill, the roller coaster, and then the fighters have the rest of it. So that's when it goes down. It may be an exciting ride, it may be a bumpy ride, but at that point, it's your job to get the crowd prepped. It's your job to get the crowd hyped up for the fight, and whatever comes after that, well, like I said, it's in the fighter's hands.
A lot of times when you're watching fights, you see a lot of local talent to that area. I think a good example in Mississippi for the last game, Brandon Davis from Biloxi fighting for that 135 strap. When you're in situations like that, do you try to give the audience maybe a little more extra oomph on their hometown guy, or do you try to keep it neutral?
Well, like I said, part of it is the selling points. Part of it's to get the crowd excited. I don't necessarily try to give it a little bit more oomph, but I try to find a little detail about that area. Whether it's if there's a nickname for the city, if there's a certain slang or a certain word that applies to that particular region, I try to incorporate it. I know with Jason and with some of those guys from Mississippi, you throw in little things like Jason was the ass kicking country boy. The other guys were the badass from the backwoods of Mississippi. So you try to appeal to the audience. You don't necessarily try to favor them, but you definitely do try to appeal to them and get a reaction from them and get them excited.
Throughout your career, you've covered so many big events. One of them, I was reading, that was a big one for you at the time. You got to announce one of Julio Cesar Chavez's, one of his last fights. For you, how did that moment rank in your career?
It was pretty huge at the time, and it still is. Growing up as a kid boxing is just a part of the culture. I always say every Mexican kid had their first amateur bout at one of the piñatas at their cousin's house. Where the adults get bored and they put the gloves on the kids. Okay, let's have you two guys go at it. And obviously Julio Cesar Chavez was such a big part of growing up. My dad, he's always been a very hardworking, very, for lack of a better term, just kind of stingy guy with his money. But when those Julio Cesar Chavez pay-per-views came around, he found a way to pay, at the time, I think it was like $49.95. He always found a reason to get those fights going. So to actually be there and announcing, such a huge figure in not only boxing but Latin culture. It's one of those, I call them Forrest Gump moments, where you're the only person that doesn't seem like they belong there. You feel like you've been dropped into a movie scene, or something that someone else should be in this role but you. So yeah, it was a huge moment. I actually got a chance to do his last two fights. The major one was in Los Angeles at what's Crypto Arena now, at the time was Staples Center. That one was just absolutely huge. Although it was towards the end of his career, fight fans are nostalgic. They wanted to either relive the height of his career, or they wanted to be a part of something that they had missed out earlier on. And yeah, it was definitely very memorable. It was something that especially, it was probably, within 5 years of me beginning my announcing, so to be there at that point yeah, it was intimidating, but at the same time, it was something you're really glad to be a part of.
You mentioned what Chavez meant to the Latino community, the Latin culture. One thing I noticed, whether it's boxing, whether it's mixed martial arts, when you have two Hispanic guys in there, two Hispanic females in there, they bring it. I mean, those are some of the greatest fights. What is it about, maybe the Latin culture, Hispanic culture in combat?
I think it's something I heard a friend of mine say once. He goes, "It's just something that we just happen to be good at." It's something that we enjoy. And I think also, especially when you have, either a Mexican or a Mexican and a Puerto Rican, I think people outside of the Latin culture see us as very homogenous, but there's a great deal of difference between, many of the cultures. The accents are different, the food is different, the music is different, the values are different. And I think the fact that we do have a language in common, so we can communicate, but also we have those rivalries and we have those differences. We think Mexican food is better. Puerto Ricans think salsa music is better. People in South America think they speak more proper Spanish than we do. So there's all these little rivalries, all these little things for people to butt heads about. And I think when you get them in the ring, you just get so competitive. And then when you add that third element of, representing your flag, representing your culture, you can't help but give it your all when you're inside the ring or inside the cage.
When you're in the ring and you're announcing names, do you zone everything out? Do you hear the crowd, or does that just fade out?
Yeah, you do hear the crowd. I guess the cheers of the crowd, or the crowd's excitement, is the equivalent to, to me being a singer and hearing some applause. Like I said, my main goal is to get you excited. My main goal is to get a reaction out of you. And when you hear that reaction, you definitely realize that, you're doing your job. And as I said, with your intonation, with the way you project your voice, with the way you lay out certain words, you can get the crowd to play along. It's almost, I've always compared it to kind of like when, and I don't mean it in any kind of demeaning way, but it's kind of like when you talk to a dog and you tell the dog, hey, you want to go to the park? You want to go to the park? The dog just gets super excited, and it's the same way with an audience. The audience is looking for an excuse to get excited. They went there not to be bored. They went to have a good time and get riled up. And if you can do that and help them, get along with that, or ignite that energy inside of them, they're appreciative for it. And like I said, they're looking for an excuse, and you might as well give it to them.
One thing I think is really cool about being a ring announcer is, for decisions, you're on those first people to see who won the fight. You figure it out before everyone else does. Are there times where, maybe you're in hostile territories, you're in an arena, you look at it and you're like, oh, these people are about to go crazy, or, oh, they're about to go nuts? Do you ever see that? Or
yeah, quite a few times. And you'd be surprised, especially with a lot of, not even just the novice fans, but the fans that have been there for a while. They get upset at me. You know what I mean? and obviously, it's the don't kill the messenger. I'm just the one reading the information. But they still get upset because it came out of your mouth. So if it came out of your mouth, then you obviously must have had something to do with it. Even though I've always said it's like getting mad at the weatherman because he tells you it's going to rain. He didn't make it rain. He's just telling you it's going to rain. So yeah, there are some tense moments. I've had some situations where, as a ring announcer, you're going to have things thrown at the ring. And who better to aim it at than at the guy standing right in the center, wearing the suit. You're the target for the incoming stuff, whether it be water bottles or whatever it might be. But yeah, it does get tense a little bit. I try to go into the cage or the ring without any preconceived notion of who won the fight. just because it's gotten to me to some weird situations where, I go in there thinking I know who won. And then when I get the scorecard, it's something completely different. And I kind of have to change my approach. So I try to go in there, with a blank, as close to a blank slate as possible, and just work off what is given to me at that moment.
In this day and age between mixed martial arts, we're at a time where combat sports is so mainstream. It's on all these different streaming services. People are watching it. It's all culturally accepted. Now you have a term called the casual fan. These are the people, a lot of times they're drunk. They like to go to B-dubs to watch the fights. You probably hear them at MMA events going twist them and they're booing. They have all these crazy takes. Overall, what do you think of the casual fan? And is it just good, something we just need to accept that's good for the sports in general?
Yeah, they're a necessary evil. It's one of those things where, without the casual fan, you don't get those 2 million pay-per-views. You don't get you don't get it on the platform like Netflix. You don't get the all the eyes. But unfortunately, it's one of those things to also where it's like me. If you take me to go see ballet, I don't know the difference between great ballet and something at a community college. But also at the same time, I don't sit there and give my opinions on ballet that I don't know, what I'm watching. I just kind of try to see what's there and kind of, live in the moment. Unfortunately, I think it's one of those things where, every guy thinks he can fight. Every guy thinks that if he had enough training or if he went in there against so and so, he would have that bit of an opportunity to possibly win the fight. And yeah, it's tough. People are sharing opinions, people are sharing views, and they don't have enough information, or they haven't seen enough bouts to know the difference between. I still have a hard time with an anaconda and a darce. If you don't know those finer points, it's tough to know exactly what you're seeing. And I think also too, it can also be a problem, not just from the casual fan, but the way some of the fights are marketed towards certain fans. Especially in boxing, every fight is marketed as a war. Pacquiao versus Mayweather, one of the biggest fights ever was marketed as a war. If you had any sort of knowledge with the way these two fighters fought, you knew that a war was never going to materialize. Floyd Mayweather never gets into wars. And I think it's the equivalent of selling someone, a can of Coke and they pop it open and there's milk inside. They're going to be pissed, because you misled them. And so I think sometimes it can be the fault of the promotion. And I think the promoters have to get away a little bit from, you've already bought the pay-per-view. So whether you're disappointed or unhappy, I already got your money in my pocket. They have to be more conscious of the fact that, there's going to be some blowback. There's going to be some repercussions where if those people bought that event, there's going to be 2 or 3 more pay-per-views they're going to do poorly because of the fact that they've lost faith in the promotion. They've lost faith in what you're selling them. So I think it's just, they're not at fault, but usually the majority tends to be sometimes the people that speak the loudest, and they really have the least amount of information to base their opinions on.
For so long, I've been a fan of these sports, probably 20, 25 years now, watching hardcore consistently. And more, the older I get, the more I see this as a business. And one of the reasons why I think there's really more business in this day and age, streaming is everything. I think there's a huge paywall now behind MMA, behind boxing. Obviously, you have all these different platforms, ESPN Plus, you have DAZN, HBO Max, all these different things where you have to have a subscription to watch a fight. Obviously, then you have your pay-per-views, big money fights, these UFC fights, boxing fights, ticket prices are just going up and up. A paywall like this, is this just something that shows how the sports have grown and evolved?
Well, I think in a sense there's always been a paywall. Sometimes it's a physical paywall. Back in the 70s where, if you didn't buy a ticket, you had to get in the building somehow. The promoter is, a lot of people criticize promoters a lot, but also they're the ones taking all the risk. A lot of in the major fights, say if you were to put, Mayweather against Pacquiao, you have to guarantee them a certain amount of money. The promoter has to, secure a massive arena. they have to pay for that arena in advance. There's staffing, there's insurance, there's promotion, there's all sorts of things that people don't see. Medicals, there's hotels, there's airplanes. All that money has been put up ahead of time before anything ever becomes a profit. And so I think, they have to find a way to recoup that money that they've invested. And I think it's one of those things where, streaming, pay-per-view, some of these paywalls just give them another avenue to make money where, I think we've both been to some events where we get there and the crowd probably isn't what we had expected. And if they were only dependent on those ticket sales, that promotion wouldn't be around very long. So they have to depend on the streaming side of it. They have to depend on sponsors. They have to depend on other things. And I think the vast majority of people don't realize exactly how much money, how much effort, how much staff is there behind the scenes to put on some of these shows. So the paywalls I think they're just there and they're there to stay, especially with some of the purchases that fighters are demanding. Also the expectations of the audience. It's no longer that you can just put on a show. Now the audience wants, the best lights. Sometimes they even want musical performers, to occur during some of the dead times. They want, fan interactions. They want, things going on in the common areas of the arena. So there's so much that the audience expects. It's just something that costs the promoters money, and without other sources of revenue, networks involved, streaming services involved, pay-per-view numbers, it's just hard to provide the types of fights that people want at a lesser price point.
One thing I think it's so cool when you listen to your start, how you start off this doing no holds barred mixed martial arts. Past several years, you've been doing something a little more similar, obviously game bred MMA. How did you get involved into this? Who reached out? And, when you heard of this idea, was this kind of a full circle moment for you?
Well, I got in touch with, I had done some work with Dean Toole, who works really closely with Jorge. Dean Toole's probably one of these guys that people see and they don't realize, what an important figure this guy is in combat sports. He's involved in almost every aspect of it. The guy is working all the time. If you follow him on social media, he's either taking off in the plane, he's landing in the plane. He's in Vegas talking to Dana White. He's in other places trying to make some other deals. So back in, I guess it was like during COVID times, we did some shows in Mexico. And Dean Toole and some of his partners were involved at the time with a smaller MMA promotion. They were doing some shows on there because it was the only place you could, Mexico's kind of, they're, if you think Florida is lenient, Mexico gets a little bit more lenient as well. So we had some shows going on that they were doing. It was a company called Icon Fighting Championships. So I did some work with them there, and that's where we made our connection. And then when he teamed up with Jorge, I had announced Jorge back in the days during my brief time with Bellator. Jorge was one of the original Bellator fighters, and then it just happened to be that when Dean Toole thought of a guy that they wanted to do the show, he mentioned me to Jorge, and Jorge remembered me from Bellator. And Jorge's a big boxing fan, so he said, "Yeah, that's the guy I want." They brought me on, and it's a wild ride, man. It's one of those shows where I think Jorge's concept of mixed martial arts competition, he's always said, "I want it to be as real as it can possibly get. I want this to be as close to a street fight as possible because that's real combat." So you've got these guys in there where, it does remind me of. I think you're probably old enough to where you were passing around that VHS tape of, UFC 1, UFC 2. It's very similar to those shows. The one thing that I do have to add is it's that level of intensity, that level of violence, so to speak, but with a lot more skill now. It's not the free swinging or, the karate guy against the jiu-jitsu guy. Once you get him on the floor, he's going to get tapped out. It's a higher level of fighting, and really it's the purest form of combat. Like Jorge says, it's almost like you could ring a bell and somebody on the street, they can go at it, and it's kind of the same thing you see in game bred. There's no gloves, there's no there's just that element of of a pure raw competition, which really excites people, and people really connect with it. And I think it has a big future.
One thing that I really learned, I think, from watching Game Bread is I think when it comes to glove mixed martial arts, boxing, I think gloves provide a false sense of reality. Obviously, when you're engaging in an actual street fight, you have to be careful. You can only throw this so hard before you start breaking things. Obviously, if you're breaking your hand within the first 2 minutes of a Game Bread contest, it's not going to end well for you. With this being the most purest form of fighting, something maybe 15, 20 years ago, people would look at this concept thinking this is insane. This will never be legal. We're at a point now where they're doing bigger and bigger shows. Every show they do, it's getting bigger. They're getting big names. Do you feel like bare knuckle mixed martial arts, do you think this could emerge and become a huge form of combat sports for years to come?
I think it's one of those things where the only barrier I can see to it becoming, on par with glove mixed martial arts is just the level of regulation. Obviously, it's still not allowed in a lot of states. You still have a lot of states that are going to be reluctant to make it, or let it to go mainstream. I think the biggest appeal that it has, it's almost like that other level. Like, yeah, you did your stuff in the UFC, but are you wild enough? Are you crazy enough to lose the gloves and go at it bare knuckle? It's almost like a badge of honor that you've taken it to that next level. If you thought MMA was crazy, how about you lose the gloves and come into the Game Bread cage? And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these big names, Junior Dos Santos, Fabricio Verdum, Guto Inocente, some of the top MMA fighters and stand-up fighters have been coming into this arena. And I think that's part of it. That's part of the appeal. It's like, yeah, I did that, but guess what? I'm crazy enough to turn it up another level and get into the bare knuckle scene.
You talked about your time in Bellator, a promotion that was doing some really, really big things, had some great mixed martial artists over there. Kind of interesting what's happened to the past couple of years, obviously it being bought by the PFL. And now very recently they announced that, they're fading the promotion. What were your thoughts when you heard that Bellator was going away? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was a bit bittersweet. The first, I was in the first season, which when you look back on it, I mean, there was John Anik was the play-by-play guy on the English side. So some pretty notable figures that went on to become big things. Alvarez was one of the original guys in Bellator. Hector Lombard. You had Jorge Masvidal, and a few others that the names escape me right now. But yeah, there was a lot of talent there. I really liked that first year. I think they were going out and trying to discover the untapped talent that wasn't in the UFC. I think as the years went on, there were some choices that were made. I've never been a huge fan of the tournament format. I just think it's too prolonged. It goes on for too long. You always end up with an alternate guy being in there, and he's the fresh other guy, and he ends up winning everything. So there were some choices where it kind of, went off the rails for a while. And I think towards the end, it just kind of became the place where people went to finish off their careers and maybe make that last payday that they weren't able to make anywhere else. But I enjoyed my time with it. I thought they did their best to give fighters an alternative home to maybe make a career for themselves. And obviously anytime you lose a promotion, it leaves a void. And when you have competition, even when Pride went away, it was one of those things where it just gives you one less option for these guys to go and make a name for themselves.
In addition to Game Bread, you also do a lot of stuff for Pro Box, obviously working with Juan Marquez. What's it been like working with those guys?
It's been great, man. It's a series where, there are guys that are behind Pro Box that they want 50-50 fights. Just recently we had a show this past Wednesday. We were out in Jamestown, California, which I call it Bigfoot country because there really wasn't much out there except this really nice casino where we were staying. And we had a couple of guys that were, one was 2-0, one was 3-0, which is rare. You usually don't see that in boxing. Your 3-0 guys are fighting, less than stellar opposition. But Pro Box wants these guys to go in there and test themselves, and I'm all for it. I'd rather see a fighter find out what he's got early on in his career than fight on to become 20-0, 25-0 with this false sense of who he is when he really hasn't faced off against top level opposition. And what Probox does is they have top level opposition going head to head very early on in their careers, and they find out what they're all about. When it comes to Juan Manuel Marquez, he and I had a little bit of a relationship back when I was with Top Rank. I did a lot of not his early fights, but early on, before he reached that superstardom. So he remembers me from that time, and just that was kind of where he was making that leap from being an also-ran to a highly respected, highly coveted, highly admired, Mexican fighter. And I got a chance to really spend a lot of time with him this weekend. And he's a great guy. And it's one of those things where I always like it when guys become superstars and they don't become jaded. He was in the casino, and I mean, we couldn't take 10 steps without people stopping and asking for pictures, asking for autographs, bringing up, of course, the Pacquiao knockout that he had in their fourth bout. And he treated everybody with such grace. He was cordial with everyone, signed everything, took every single picture. So it's really great to see someone like that. I've never understood that when you become famous, that was your whole goal, was to become famous, and now you hate people recognizing you. It's like that was your whole goal. You're famous now, and now live with it. And he does a great job of it.
No, I really think what Pro Boxing is doing is really cool by, giving these guys very evenly matched fights. And I think a problem that you've seen it with boxing, you're really starting to see it now with mixed martial arts. Regional promotions, you're seeing guys kind of get fed. You're seeing these guys make it to the UFC, 8-0, 9-0 guys, but you look at their records and, they're fighting guys that are 5-11. The promotions are favoring them. They're grooming their product. They're giving them easy contests, or maybe not easy, but, favorable matchups to try to get them to that next level. Do you think this is a problem across all of combat sports?
I think it's always been a problem. It's always been it's just the formula that so many promoters have followed. I think every promoter wants to be the guy who discovers the next Mike Tyson, who discovers the next Conor McGregor. And oftentimes they fall in love with a fighter before the fighter has really matured as a talent. It's one of those things where they'll attach themselves to a guy because he can speak, because he's flamboyant, because he's got the swag, as they say. And sometimes, their actual ability to fight comes last. There was a joke with some of the promoters where I worked with, where they're like, yeah, man, this guy is great. He can talk. He's good looking. He's got a following. And they would say, man, too bad he can't fight. And that's, you would think that would be the basis of every promoter's interest in signing a fighter, but that's not always the case. Always sometimes they look at those other qualities and those other elements before they focus on their actual, talent inside the cage or inside the ring. But it's always going to be there, because I think the one thing that every fighter needs to remember is, and it goes for everyone in the entertainment business, whether you're a singer, an athlete, or you're, in movies. And like I said, sports is entertainment because you're competing with people's attention. Once you decide to be part of this, you're no longer a person, you're a product. You're a product that gets bought, that gets sold, that gets marketed. And like any other product, if you don't sell, you get taken off the shelf. You end up in the discount bin. So I think it's important for fighters to remember that and try to make themselves the best product possible. And whether that be work on your social media, work on your ability to do interviews, but also work on your ability in the ring, in the cage, and try to be the best version of that fighter that you can be, the best product possible.
All right, Lupe, last question for you, my friend. Do you think you're going to be involved in combat sports some way or another for the rest of your life?
Well, my joke with people is I have no other marketable skills, man. This is it. This is the only talent I have. And it's one of those things where I'll be around as long as people will have me. I don't want to be the equivalent of that fighter that was long shot and just doesn't. He's the last person to realize that he can't fight anymore. I don't want to be that version of an announcer. but I enjoy it. I enjoy the travel. First and foremost, I'm a fan of combat sports, and as long as I can add something to a promotion, I'm more than happy to be there, and I still enjoy every aspect of it.
Awesome. Hey, well, Lupe, hey, thank you so much, man, for talking to me tonight. It's absolutely amazing to catch up, listen to some of these stories, talk to someone who knows the ins and out of combat sports.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me, and all the best. We'll see you soon.
Absolutely. That's it for us tonight. I'm Carl Prusa. That's Mr. Lupe Contreras. Stick around, fight fans.